We both build from within, and we attract from without. Thought is the force with which we build, for these thoughts are forces. Like builds like, and like attracts like. In the degree that thought is spiritualized, does it become more subtle and powerful in its workings. This spiritualizing is in accordance with law, and is within the power of all. Everything is first worked out in the unseen before it is manifested in the seen, in the ideal before it is realized in the real, in the spiritual before it shows forth in the material. The realm of the unseen is the realm of cause. The realm of the seen is the realm of effect. The nature of effect is always determined and conditioned by the nature of its cause. To point out the great facts in connection with and the great laws underlying the workings of the interior, spiritual, thought forces, to point them out so simply and so clearly that even a child can understand, is the author's aim. To point them out so simply and so clearly that all can grasp them, that all can take them and infuse them into everyday life, so as to mold it in all its details in accordance with what they would have it, is his purpose. That life can thus be molded by them is not a matter of mere speculation or theory with him, but a matter of positive knowledge. There is a divine sequence running throughout the universe. Within and above and below, the human will incessantly works the divine will to come into harmony with it, and thereby with all the higher laws and forces, to come then into league and to work in conjunction with them, in order that they can work in league and in conjunction with us, is to come into the chain of this wonderful sequence. This is the secret of all success. This is to come into the possession of unknown riches, into the realization of undreamed of powers.
So Trine says that says thoughts come from within. What does it say? We live from within and we attract from without. So there is an outer and inner process going on here. But that's not the same as what Bennett talks about as influx and efflux. And I was thinking about this in terms of Unity's ideas of denials and affirmations. And the idea of denials, I think of it as a sweeping out of negative thoughts, emotions. And also, you know, it's not a separate thing from the affirmation. And in fact, denials can often be phrased, and maybe best practices are they should be phrased as in a positive frame. But what my thought is that, you know, I do see this as an influx and efflux process. It's not just within, without. There's also without, within happening. An inner and outer flow, a dialectic, if you will, but not a dialectic of struggle, a dialectic of harmony, of synthesis. I guess that's where I differ from Hegel, is I'd focus more on the synthesis part than the thesis and antithesis struggle. Because out of that struggle does get worked out a synthesis, and that's how harmony gets produced, and that's how humanity gets closer to spirit and to all-knowing, as Hegel says. But my point was that I was thinking about this idea of denial as sweeping, a process of sweeping. Of course, sweeping was a thing that was influential on the Shakers. Because they had Shaker brooms, they designed their brooms in a certain way to be simple and beautiful and functional to work or something. So you can imagine, maybe I'll bring an image to your mind of a Shaker meeting house, which is largely an open room with pews, wooden pews maybe. I mean, kind of like a Quaker meeting house essentially, but with a large, so segregated though by gender, a male and female. We'll leave that aside, but and then there's a large area for shaking, dancing. Right? So you can imagine this large, simple room. It's not very adorned, you know, like the Rococo Catholic basilicas and things, but it's simple type of meeting house, and it's your job for the day in the group. You're a Shaker practitioner to sweep out the meeting house. So what happens when you sweep out the meeting house? Well, first off, what is your goal? Your goal is to get rid of the dust, but it's not even actually to get rid of the dust so much as to put the dust in its proper place. Actually, that's as the Shaker song says, to turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right, in the right place. So that is not to deny the dust, to sweep it out. You don't want it in the meeting house, you don't want it in your home, because in that case it's dirty, but it belongs outside. And so you put it in its rightful place, and then it can be soil for your garden, can help things grow, and can be useful in that way. So when I think of denial and affirmation, we're not denying our struggles, and we're not saying we don't have them. We're not saying we don't have struggles, but we are releasing them and saying that they do not hold power over me. And that's a very liberating, affirming thing. But really, we're not destroying anything, right? Science says matter can't be created or destroyed. We're just putting it in its proper place. And that's what makes me think about Judas Iscariot in metaphysical terms. You know, Jesus forgave Judas in the gospel. And in metaphysical terms, according to Fillmore, Judas represents life. Maybe that was a Freudian slip there. And there's nothing wrong with life and wanting to protect life and having a appreciation and exuberance for life. This life that we're given is one of our gifts. It's one of those divine ideas. It's one of the 12 powers. But being overly protective, being paranoid, being anxious, that is not truly living. That's focusing on the protection of life over actually living. So what we do is we spiritualize these ideas by uniting them with the indwelling Christ, and in that way we put them in their proper place. So by turning, we come round right.
The supreme fact of the universe. The great central fact of the universe is that spirit of infinite life and power that is behind all, that animates all, that manifests itself in and through all, that self-existent principle of life from which all has come, and not only from which all has come, but from which all is continually coming. If there is an individual life, there must be of necessity an infinite source of life from which it comes. If there is a quality or a force of love, there must be of necessity be an infinite source of love whence it comes. If there is wisdom, there must be the all-wise source behind it from which it springs. The same is true in regard to peace, the same in regard to power, the same in regard to what we call material things. There is, then, this spirit of infinite life and power, behind all which is the source of all. This infinite power is creating, working, ruling through the agency of great immutable laws and forces that run through all the universe, that surround us on every side. Every act of our everyday lives is governed by these same great laws and forces. Every flower that blooms by the wayside springs up, grows, blooms, fades, according to certain great immutable laws. Every snowflake that plays between earth and heaven forms, falls, melts, according to certain great unchangeable laws. In a sense, there is nothing in all the great universe but law. If this is true, there must of necessity be a force behind it all that is the maker of these laws, and a force greater than the laws that are made. This spirit of infinite life and power that is behind all is what I call God. I do not care what term you may use, be it kindly light, providence, the oversoul, omnipotence, or whatever term may be most convenient. I care not what the term may be as long as we are agreed in regard to the great central fact itself. God, then, is this infinite spirit which fills all the universe with himself alone, so that all is from him and in him, and there is nothing that is outside. Indeed and in truth, then in him we live and move and have our being. He is the life of our life, our very life itself. We have received, we are continually receiving our life from him. We are partakers of the life of God. And though we differ from him in that we are individualized spirits, while he is the infinite spirit, including us as well as all else beside, yet in essence the life of God and the life of man are identically the same, and so are one. They differ not in essence, in quality, they differ in degree. There have been and are highly illumined souls who believe that we receive our life from God after the manner of a divine inflow. And again, there have been and are those who believe that our life is one with the life of God, and so that God and man are one, which is right. Both are right. Both right when rightly understood. In regard to the first, if God is the infinite spirit of life behind all, whence all comes, then clearly our life as individualized spirits is continually coming from this infinite source by means of this divine inflow. In the second place, if our lives as individualized spirits are directly from, are parts of this infinite spirit of life, then the degree of the infinite spirit that is manifested in the life of each must be identical in quality with that source, the same as a drop of water taken from the ocean is, in nature, in characteristics, identical with that ocean, its source. And how could it be otherwise? The liability to misunderstanding in this latter case, however, is this, in that although the life of God and the life of man in essence are identically the same, the life of God so far transcends the life of individual man that it includes all else beside. In other words, so far as the quality of life is concerned, in essence they are the same. So far as the degree of life is concerned, they are vastly different. In this light, is it not then evident that both conceptions are true? And more, that they are one and the same? Both conceptions may be typified by one and the same illustration. There is a reservoir in a valley which receives its supply from an inexhaustible reservoir on the mountainside. It is then true that the reservoir in the valley receives its supply by virtue of the inflow of water from the larger reservoir on the mountainside. It is also true that the water in the smaller reservoir is in nature, in quality, in characteristics identically the same as that in the larger reservoir which is its source. The difference, however, is this. The reservoir on the mountainside, in the amount of its water, so far transcends the reservoir in the valley that it can supply innumerable number of like reservoirs and still be unexhausted. And so, in the life of man, if, as I think we have already agreed, however we may differ in regard to anything else, there is this infinite spirit of life behind all, the life of all, and so, from which all comes, then the life of individual man, your life and mine, must come by a divine flow from this infinite source. And if this is true, then the life that comes by this inflow to man is necessarily the same in essence as is the infinite spirit of life. There is a difference. It is not a difference in essence. It is a difference in degree. If this is true, does it not then follow that in the degree that man opens himself to this divine inflow does he approach to God? If so, it then necessarily flows in that degree that he makes this approach does he take on the God powers. And if the God powers are without limit, does it not then follow that the only limitations man has are the limitations he sets to himself by virtue of not knowing himself? Though set by the self, ignorance is the most potent factor in setting limitations to the majority of mankind, and so the great majority of people continue.
So Trine is talking about
on the right to I-490 west toward Buffalo.
Trine's talking about being as divine beings, as Swedenborg said, we receive this divine influx. Charles Fillmore talks about divine substance, which is different than matter, sort of a finer form of matter. That aligns with what John Murray Spear said. That is insofar as spirit is a substance, it is matter, but of a finer form. And so that's, I think I share that view. But something Trine said about differences of degree, but not differences of quality, made me think of a prism. You ever see the cover of the Pink Floyd album, Dark Side of the Moon? White light goes in and then Roy G. Biv comes out the other end. But it's not just Roy G. Biv, which, by the way, if you don't know, is red, orange, green, blue, indigo, and violet, which represents sort of the different frequencies in the rainbow. But it's not just Roy G. Biv, because those are the frequencies that appear to us. And as Charles Fillmore says about the passions, and also with music, just as there are more notes, there's actually an infinite number of frequencies in between each note, like between an A and an A sharp. You can fine tune those frequencies all the way up. There's some instruments that are tuned differently to different frequencies than in Western music. Western music is sort of very rational, mathematical product of the Enlightenment. But it made me think about diversity too, and the idea that diversity is our strength, because it conjured a dream that I had many years ago. It must have been over a decade ago. It was before I was with my wife. And it was a dream like no other dream I had had. And actually probably still haven't had quite that type of experience that I had then. Must have been in my 30s, early 30s. And so the way the dream starts is I'm sort of riding around on a motorcycle in a cemetery, which doesn't quite work out for me because I keep running into the headstones and damaging them. And then I kind of give up on that. I decide, well, I kind of hope nobody saw me damage the headstones. So I go into a little shop that's across the street from the cemetery. Actually adjacent, next to the cemetery, on the other side of the street. But there's another cross street between them. And I go over to this little sort of old-timey general store, but it's tiny. It's like literally a corner store, you know, it's this little corner of this building. And I order something, I think tobacco or something like that. And I haven't smoked tobacco in a long time, actually. And I wonder also if that was conjuring thoughts of the original peoples and their religious practices that lived in this land that we call North America, that they call Turtle Island. And so maybe that's what triggered then this next event. The beginning of the dream is actually relatively mundane, even though it sounds a little bit weird. The significant part was, so then I look, and behind this building where there's this little tiny corner store, you know, I kind of go around, and like I said, there was another street crossing and go down, and there's like this hill. Again, you know, I actually hadn't thought about it until right now, but actually the hill resembled the mounds of the Hokkien peoples and Mississippian peoples that lived in North America, Turtle Island. Thousands of years before Europeans. So I climbed to the top of this mound, and there's like a hole at the top. And I look down into the hole, and it's like a spiral. And then all of a sudden I realize I'm inside of this thing, and for some reason now I become conscious that the outside of it isn't so much, you know, like a Mississippian mound as it is like a conch shell that's stuck into the ground. And I start to realize that where I am is inside of a temple. But this isn't any ordinary temple. Like I said, it's this spiral temple. There's this staircase along the outside. I'll talk about the spiral in a second, but I look outside, and there are people, and they're arriving, sort of parking their vehicles, whatever they may be, and there's different, you know, horse and buggies and cars and motorcycles and different kinds of vehicles out there. And they're sort of arriving at the cemetery and walking over to the temple and coming into the temple, which the entrance now is not the entrance that I came through, which was through the top, but through the bottom of this massive conch shell like thing. And I notice also that they're from all different cultures. They appear to have all different tones of skin. I don't want to say race, because I think at this level where I was, there wasn't an idea of race, but perhaps an idea of different frequencies on the spectrum. And there were different skin tones there, and also different cultural expressions, and in various forms of dress, and in some cases undress. There were some like Dobi Ju Huanxi, like the gods must be crazy people, that Marshall Salins wrote about. Bushmen, I guess would be the colloquial. And there were like Yanomamo, from the rainforest, but there were also like Masonic and like Catholic and sort of mystical, robes and hoods and things like that. And I just got the impression that these people were all dressed in whatever their cultural formation's idea of sacred dress was. And they're all coming to worship at this temple, at the same temple, even though they're of all different religions, all different cultural expressions. And I start to get scared, actually, and I start to ascend this tower. Now it reminds me actually of some of the towers, like in cemeteries, like the tower where I proposed to my wife at the Mount Albion Cemetery. And I'm climbing this spiral staircase. Actually, it also reminds me of when I was a kid, I went to the Statue of Liberty in New York, climbed up this staircase. It was a frightening experience when you climb these things. You see how far you are. Oh, we climbed the cathedral in Copenhagen too. The cathedral spiral. They all tend to be these spiral designs. Actually, that was much later than this dream, though. That's actually a significant sort of reverberation of this dream, maybe later on in life. That's a little bit more recent that happened to me. My wife and I climbed to the top of that Lutheran cathedral in Copenhagen with the triumphant Christ statue at the top. But what it also made me think about, I think this is a very Gnostic, apocryphal kind of dream, because later on, again, I must have seen this picture before, but later on I saw it again, and it immediately recalled this dream to me, and it was William Blake's, I think it's called Jacob's Ladder, and it's like angels that are descending this spiral staircase type thing that kind of looks like a shell. And it's actually not like a conch shell, it's like a different, it's like the longer, what's the longer, maybe like a crab or something it is, I don't know. But what struck me in Trine that brought me back to that dream, and again, the feeling of that dream was at first fear. I was like, these people are going to catch me in their property, in the place of worship that belongs to them, and that my sense was, this doesn't belong to me, I don't belong here, at first. But then, as they start to sort of ascend the stairs and kind of pay me no mind and pass me by, actually, many of them, many of them also pull me into the procession, and it's a lively, joyous procession, even though it's really up very high, and I'm looking down. I'm kind of frightened, but that's my problem. I'm looking down, and then I look up and I see the light, and I see that that's all that there is. So what that made me think about in Trine then, so he talks about that idea of difference of degree. There's also the idea of absolute versus relative reality. The absolute reality is the oneness, and that's the spiral staircase that we're all ascending to, our stairway to heaven. And down below is a separation, is a bifurcation, is the diversity, which is beautiful, which is all part of God's creation, all 12 powers working together. But as we ascend, you know, as Hegel says, and Hegel talks about it as a spiral as well, that there's a thesis, antithesis, and then a synthesis. So it goes left, right to the middle, then back left, right to then right, then the synthesis becomes the thesis, and the process starts again. So it is a spiral ascension towards spirit, and our diversity in that is the colors of the rainbow. It's the frequencies in music, the harmonic frequencies that when played together in their right place,
Right to I-90 West.
make beautiful music, joyous noise.
Mankind has not yet realized that the real self is one with the life of God. Through its ignorance, it has never yet opened itself to the divine inflow, and so has never made itself a channel through which the infinite powers and forces can manifest. When we know ourselves merely as men, we live accordingly, and have merely the powers of men. When we come into the realization of the fact that we are God-men, then again we live accordingly, and have the powers of God-men. In the degree that we open ourselves to this divine inflow, are we changed from mere men into God-men. A friend has a beautiful lotus pond, a natural basin on his estate. His farm, as he always calls it, is supplied with water from a reservoir in the foothills some distance away. A gate regulates the flow of the water from the main that conducts it from the reservoir to the pond. It is a spot of transcendent beauty. There, through the days of the perfect summer weather, the lotus flowers lie full bloom upon the surface of the clear, transparent water. The June roses and other wildflowers are continually blooming upon its banks. The birds come here to drink and to bathe, and from early until late one can hear the melody of their song. The bees are continually at work in this garden of wildflowers, a beautiful grove in which many kinds of wild berries and many varieties of brakes and ferns grow, stretches back of the pond as far as the eye can reach. Our friend is a man, nay more, a God-man, a lover of his kind, and as a consequence, no notice bearing such words as, "Private grounds, no trespassing allowed," or "Trespassers will be prosecuted," stands on his estate. But at the end of a beautiful byway that leads through the wild wood up to this enchanting spot stands a notice bearing the words, "All are welcome to the Lotus Pond." All love our friend. Why? They can't help it. He so loves them, and what is his is theirs. Here one may often find merry groups of children at play. Here many times tired and weary-looking men and women come, and somehow, when they go, their faces wear a different expression. The burden seems to be lifted, and now and then I've heard them when leaving, sometimes in a faint murmur, as if uttering a benediction, say, "God bless our brother friend." Many speak of this spot as the Garden of God. My friend calls it his soul garden, and he spends many hours in quiet here. Often have I seen him after the others have gone, walking to and fro, or sitting quietly in the clear moonlight on an old rustic bench, drinking in the perfume of the wildflowers. He is a man of a beautifully simple nature. He says that here the real things of life come to him, and that here his greatest and most successful plans, many times as a flash of inspiration, suggest themselves to him. Everything in the immediate vicinity seems to breathe the spirit of kindliness, comfort, goodwill, and good cheer. The very cattle and sheep, as they come to the old stone fence at the edge of the grove and look across to this beautiful spot, seem indeed to get the same enjoyment that the people are getting. They seem almost to smile in the realization of their contentment and enjoyment, or perhaps it seems so to the onlooker, because he can scarcely help smiling as he sees the manifested evidence of their contentment and pleasure. The gate of the pond is always opened wide enough to admit a supply of water so abundant that it continually overflows a quantity sufficient to feed a stream that runs through the fields below, giving the pure mountain water and drink to the cattle and flocks that are grazing there. The stream then flows on through the neighbors' fields. Not long ago, our friend was absent for a year. He rented his estate during his absence to a man who, as the world goes, was of a very practical turn of mind. He had no time for anything that did not bring him direct practical returns. The gate connecting to the reservoir with the lotus pond was shut down, and no longer had the crystal mountain water the opportunity to feed and overflow it. The notice of our friend, "All are welcome to the lotus pond," was removed, and no longer were the gay companies of children, men and women seen at the pond. A great change came over everything. On account of the lack of the life-giving water, the flowers in the pond wilted, and their long stems lay stretched upon the mud in the bottom. The fish that formerly swam in its clear water soon died and gave an offensive odor to all who came near. The flowers no longer bloomed on its banks. The birds no longer came to drink and to bathe. No longer was heard the hum of bees. And more, the stream that ran through the fields below dried up, so that the cattle and the flocks no longer got their supply of clear mountain water. The difference between the spot now and the lotus pond when our friend gave it his careful attention was caused, as we readily see, by shutting off the gate to the pond, thus preventing the water from the reservoir in the hills, which was the source of its life, from entering it. And when this, the source of its life, was shut off, not only was the appearance of the lotus pond entirely changed, but the surrounding fields were deprived of the stream, to whose banks the flocks and cattle came for drink. In this, do we not see a complete parallel so far as human life is concerned? In the degree that we recognize our oneness, our connection with the infinite spirit which is the life of all, and in the degree that we open ourselves to this divine inflow, do we come into harmony with the highest, the most powerful, and the most beautiful everywhere. And in the degree that we do this, do we overflow, so that all who come in contact with us receive the effects of this realization on our part. This is the lotus pond of our friend, he who is in love with all that is truest and best in the universe. And in the degree that we fail to recognize our oneness with this infinite source, and so close, shut ourselves to this divine inflow, do we come into that state where there seems to be with us nothing of good, nothing of beauty, nothing of power. And when this is true, those who come in contact with us receive not good, but harm. This is the spot of the lotus pond while the farm was in the hands of a renter. There is this difference between the lotus pond and your life and
Trine gives an example of a lotus pond that was on private property, but the owner welcomes people onto it, and they became joyous because of it. And then somebody else bought it and cut it off to others, and the result was that the pond became neglected and the lotuses died, and et cetera, et cetera. So Trine's point here is he demonstrates that when we cultivate our spiritual growth, our spiritual garden, so to speak, it radiates the beauty, the wisdom, whatever of those 12 powers that we're cultivating.
1.25 miles. Take exit 48. On the right to Route 98.
That radiates to others. And I think, one of the things is that one of the mysteries in New Thought, and according to Ed Rabel, mystery, or which he calls mysticism, is one of the 5 essential aspects of metaphysics. He talks about theology, which is about God; cosmology, which is about creation; psychology, which is about human nature.
Take exit 48. On the right to Route 98.
Mysticism, which is about mystery, and blanking on the 5th one. Oh, science. That's it. The 5th one is science, which is about facts, about facts in this existence, in 3D reality, lowercase r reality. But he talks about one of the mysteries is, why is there bad in the world? And it's a good question, because if God is all good, that's one of our basic unity principles. If God is all good, and so people then, who are expressions of God,
in 1/4 mile, turn right on Route 98 north,
all have an essential goodness to them, then why do bad things happen? Why do we live in a world of warfare and capitalistic greed? And what Martin Luther King talked about, the triple evils of...
In 2 miles, turn left on Batavia-Elda Town Line Road.
Racism, militarism, and greed. Racism, militarism, and capitalism. Why do we live in a world where that's the way, seems to be the way that the powers that be would like it? Well, it does say in the scripture that our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers of this system. Now, what does he mean by that? Now, that's kind of an interesting verse. Maybe I'll break that down a little bit. But let's talk about that first part first. Our fight is not against flesh and blood. In fact, the fight is the fight, isn't it? Fighting is the fight, to stop the fight. Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers, but this was Jesus expressing his human emotion and really going against his spirit nature. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on the donkey represents his mastery over his animal nature. But Jesus taught that the fight is the problem. Cease to fight.
Turn left on Batavia-Elda Town Line Road.
As William Lloyd Garrison said, again, William Lloyd Garrison could be considered one of the fiercest fighters for abolition of slavery, one of the greatest evils of American society. And he said, be non-resistant and do not turn to government. Because he called it non-resistance, no government, non-resistance. He saw governments as essentially coercive and violent. I mean, this is how Marx also characterized the state. And as those revolutionaries said, that, like Lenin, that there would be a eventual withering away of the state. Well, they never really withered away. They never proceeded to process the withering away. And that's because they said they never achieved socialism, so they couldn't establish communism before they achieved socialism. Okay, but the rulers of the system, what does that part of the verse mean? I think it means that those parts of us within ourselves that appear to be programmed, and I say appear to be because I don't subscribe to the simulation theory. Our reality is real because we experience it, we feel it, so it is real in that sense. Material is real because we can feel it. We need it to sustain our bodies with food. But the divine principle that that's based on is growth, sustenance, use. Sweetbrook talks about uses. So this material 3D level is based on capital R real divine principles. But it is a struggle to be non-resistant, because in our non-resistance we resist the authorities of this world. We become truly ourselves by letting go and letting God, turning within and looking at how we process things. And I was watching a talk by Paul Hasselbeck the other day. He was saying something about how, metaphysics is radical responsibility. I don't know if I agree. Well, yes, metaphysics, I agree with that part. Yes, metaphysics is radical responsibility. But he also echoed Butterworth's statement that life is lived from inside out. But then he said, I talked to somebody one time, and they, somebody was yelling at them, and they just stayed calm. And I asked, what's your secret? They said, you can only change you. Well, that implies that there's something you can't change, right? The serenity prayer. I keep going back to the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So divine law cannot be changed. Absolute reality cannot be changed. And in my belief, there are some external influences that affect us internally because we commune with the collective subconscious, which is not always the divine consciousness. We commune with a collective soul that is a lower consciousness than spirit. So I do believe that there are external influences. But here's the hope. Here's the hope. When we commune with the collective subconsciousness, as Jung talked about, we can influence it. When we connect with spirit, we are radiating our vibration out to others. And that's what Trine is talking about in this chapter too. He says that our connection with spirit is noticed and felt by others, and it uplifts them as well and sets them on the right path. So what's the message for us in these trying times? You know, when it seems like, you know, maybe things are bleak. If we want to look at it that way, well, what can we do? We can deny that view any power over us. Trine says, the pessimist is correct and the optimist is correct. Both are correct from their point of view. The difference is the point of view. So which point of view do you want to take? Do you want to take a point of view that things are negative, which perpetuates negativity, which radiates negativity to others via the communing with the collective subconscious? Or do you want to take the positive, optimistic path of connection with divinity, connection with spirit, connection with God as you see it, or him, or her? And then take that and act with that spirit in mind. Act as if it's already happened. And the utopian world that you want to build, the kingdom of heaven that's in your mind, is here on earth because you choose it. So let's choose it. Let's choose the kingdom of heaven rather than the hell of mammonism. Embrace it. Embrace the spirit and welcome the indwelling Christ, the Christ who dwells within.
God is the spirit of infinite life. If we are partakers of this life and have the power of opening ourselves fully to its divine flow, it means more, so far as even the physical life is concerned, than we may at first think. For very clearly, the life of this infinite spirit, from its very nature, can admit of no disease. And if this is true, no disease can exist in the body where it freely enters, through which it freely flows. Let us recognize at the outset that, so far as the physical life is concerned, all life is from within out. There is an immutable law which says, as within, so without, cause, effect. In other words, the thought forces, the various mental states and the emotions all have in time their effects upon the physical body. Someone says, I hear a great deal said today in regard to the effects of the mind upon the body, but I don't know as I place very much confidence in this. Don't you? Someone brings you sudden news. You grow pale, you tremble, or perhaps you fall into a faint. It is, however, through the channel of your mind that the news is imparted to you. A friend says something to you, perhaps at the table, something that seems very unkind. You are hurt by it, as we say. You have been enjoying your dinner, but from this moment your appetite is gone. But what was said entered into and affected you through the channel of your mind. Look, yonder goes a young man, dragging his feet, stumbling over the slightest obstruction in the path. Why is it? Simply that he is weak-minded, an idiot. In other words, a falling state of mind is productive of a falling condition of the body. To be sure-minded is to be sure-footed. To be uncertain in mind is to be uncertain in step. Again, a sudden emergency arises. You stand trembling and weak with fear. Why are you powerless to move? Why do you tremble? And yet you believe that the mind has but little influence upon the body. You are for a moment dominated by a fit of anger. For a few hours afterwards you complain of a violent headache. And still, you do not seem to realize that the thoughts and emotions have an effect upon the body. A day or two ago, while conversing with a friend, we were speaking of worry. "My father is greatly given to worry," he said. "Your father is not a healthy man," I said. "He is not strong, vigorous, robust, and active." I then went on to describe to him more fully his father's condition and the troubles which afflicted him. He looked at me in surprise and said, "Why, you do not know my father?" "No," I replied. "How then can you describe so accurately the disease with which he is afflicted?" "You have just told me that your father is greatly given to worry. When you told me this, you indicated to me cause. In describing your father's condition, I simply connected with the cause its own peculiar effects. Fear and worry have the effect of closing up the channels of the body so that the life forces flow in a slow and sluggish manner. Hope and tranquility open the channels of the body so that the life forces go bounding through it in such a way that disease can rarely get a foothold. Not long ago, a lady was telling a friend of a serious physical trouble. My friend happened to know that between this lady and her sister, the most kindly relations did not exist. He listened attentively to her delineation of her troubles, and then, looking her squarely in the face, in a firm but kindly tone said, "Forgive your sister." The woman looked at him in surprise and said, "I can't forgive my sister." "Very well then," he replied. "Keep the stiffness of your joints and your kindred rheumatic troubles." A few weeks later, he saw her again. With a light step, she came toward him and said, "I took your advice. I saw my sister and forgave her. We have become good friends again, and I don't know how it is, but somehow or other from the very day, as I remember that we became reconciled, my troubles seem to grow less, and today there is not a trace of the old difficulties left. And really, my sister and I have become such good friends that now we can scarcely get along without one another." Again, we have effect following cause. We have several well-authenticated cases of the following nature. A mother has been dominated for a few moments by an intense passion of anger, and the child at her breast has died within an hour's time. So poisoned became the mother's milk by virtue of the poisonous secretions of the system while under the domination of this fit of anger. In other cases, it has caused severe illness and convulsions. The following experiment has been tried a number of times by a well-known scientist. Several men have been put into a heated room. Each man has been dominated for a moment by a particular passion of some kind, one by an intense passion of anger, and others by different other passions. The experimenter has taken a drop of perspiration from the body of each of these men, and by means of a careful chemical analysis, he has been able to determine the particular passion by which each has been dominated. Practically the same results revealed themselves in the chemical analysis of the saliva of each of the men. Conversing with a friend, we were speaking of worry. "My father is greatly given to worry."
So Trine also talks about this idea that life is lived from within out, and he mentions an example of if somebody gives you bad news, it affects your consciousness. You feel it. You feel it from the inside. Fair enough, but what's the initial trigger of that internal state? It's the external stimulus. It's literally actually sound waves from somebody else's vocal cords. Let's break this down. Somebody else's vocal cords produce sound waves. The sound waves enter your ear, your inner ear, interprets those vibrations. Then your consciousness interprets those vibrations as symbols based on your experience. So that comes from your consciousness, specifically your memory. And then those symbols, those words, then are internalized, so there's an influx of the meaning of those words into you. Once that influx has happened, then you have an internal experience. So yes, our consciousness absolutely affects our reality, but the way that we commune with the collective subconscious also affects it. Now, I think that though, by calling this internal versus external, actually that's creating a duality that is maybe problematic. I think, if we are non-dualists, we shouldn't maybe think of the internal and the external. We shouldn't think of the influx and efflux as two separate processes. So that's where I think maybe there's a breakdown of communication between a Hegelian, enchanted materialist, sort of more academic view, and a new thought, idealist view. Is that essentially there is no duality between internal and external. So Trine talks about that. Again, the Hermetic concept of as above, so below, but does not recognize that as a dialectical, spiraling relationship, as I mentioned for my dream. See, I see it as a spiraling relationship where thesis, antithesis produces synthesis, which is harmony, and harmony brings us higher in ascension towards spirit.
Today, and we shall find even more and more as time passes that practically all disease, with its consequent suffering, has its origin in perverted mental and emotional states and conditions. The mental attitude we take toward anything determines to a greater or less extent its effects upon us. If we fear it, or if we antagonize it, the chances are that it will have detrimental or even disastrous effects upon us. If we come into harmony with it by quietly recognizing and inwardly asserting our superiority over it, in the degree that we are able successfully to do this, in that degree will it carry with it no injury for us. No disease can enter into or take hold of our bodies unless it find therein something corresponding to itself, which makes it possible. And in the same way, no evil or undesirable condition of any kind can come into our lives unless there is already in them that which invites it, and so makes it possible for it to come. The sooner we begin to look within ourselves for the cause of whatever comes to us, the better it will be. For so much the sooner will we begin to make conditions within ourselves such that only good may enter. We, who from our very nature should be masters of all conditions, by virtue of our ignorance are mastered by almost numberless conditions of every description. Do I fear a draft? There's nothing in the draft. A little purifying current of God's pure air, to cause me trouble, to bring on a cold, perhaps an illness. The draft can affect me only in the degree that I myself make it possible, only in the degree that I allow it to affect me. We must distinguish between causes and mere occasions. The draft is not cause, nor does it carry cause with it. Two persons are sitting in the same draft. One is injuriously affected by it. The other experiences not even an inconvenience, but he rather enjoys it. The one is a creature of circumstances. He fears the draft, cringes before it, continually thinks of the harm it is doing him. In other words, he opens every avenue for it to enter and take hold of him. And so it, harmless and beneficent in itself, brings to him exactly what he has empowered it to bring. The other recognizes himself as the master over and not the creature of circumstances. He is not concerned about the draft. He puts himself into harmony with it, makes himself positive to it. And instead of experiencing any discomfort, he enjoys it. And in addition to its doing him a service by bringing the pure, fresh air from without to him, it does him the additional service of hardening him even more to any future conditions of a like nature. But if the draft was cause, it would bring the same results to both. The fact that it does not shows that it is not a cause, but a condition, and it brings to each effects which correspond to the conditions it finds within each. Poor draft! How many thousands, nay, millions of times is it made the scapegoat by those who are too ignorant or too unfair to look their own weaknesses square in the face, and who instead of becoming imperial masters remain cringing slaves. Think of it, what it means. A man created the image of the eternal God, sharer of his life and power, born to have dominion, fearing, shaking, cringing before a little draught of pure life-giving air. But scapegoats are convenient things, even if the only thing they do for us is to aid us in our constant efforts at self-delusion. The best way to disarm a draft of the bad effects it has been accustomed to bring one is first to bring about a pure and healthy set of conditions within, then to change one's mental attitude toward it. Recognize the fact that of itself it has no power. It has only the power you invest it with. Thus you will put yourself into harmony with it, and will no longer sit in fear of it. Then sit in a draft a few times and get hardened to it, as everyone, by going at it judiciously, can readily do. But suppose one is in delicate health or especially subject to drafts. Then he be simply a little judicious at first. Don't seek the strongest that can be found, especially if you do not as yet in your own mind feel equal to it. For if you do not, it signifies that you still fear it, that supreme regulator of all life. Good common sense must be used here, the same as elsewhere. If we are born to have dominion, and that we are is demonstrated by the fact that some have attained it, and what one has done, soon or late, all can do, then it is not necessary that we live under the domination of any physical agent. In the degree that we recognize our own interior powers, then we are rulers and able to dictate. In the degree that we fail to recognize them, we are slaves and are dictated to. We build whatever we find within us. We attract whatever comes to us, and all in accordance with spiritual law, for all natural law is spiritual law. The whole of human life is cause and effect. There is no such thing in it as chance, nor is there even in all the wide universe. Are we not satisfied with whatever comes into our lives? The thing to do, then, is not to spend time in railing against the imaginary something we create and call fate, but to look to the within and change the causes at work there, in order that things of a different nature may come, for there will come exactly what we cause to come. This is true not only of the physical body, but of all phases and conditions of life. We invite whatever comes, and did we not invite it, either consciously or unconsciously, it could not and it would not come. This may undoubtedly be hard for some to believe, or even to see at first. But in the degree that one candidly and open-mindedly looks at it, and then studies into the silent, but subtle and, so to speak, omnipotent workings of the thought forces, and as he traces their effects within him and about him, it becomes clearly evident and easy to understand. And then whatever does come to one depends for its effects entirely upon his mental attitude toward it. Does this or that occurrence or condition cause you annoyance? Very well. It causes you annoyance, and so disturbs your peace merely because you allow it to. You are born to have absolute control over your own dominion, but if you voluntarily hand over this power, even if for a little while, to someone or to something else, then you of course become the creature, the one controlled. To live undisturbed by passing occurrences, you must first find your own center. You must then be firm in your own center, and so rule the world from within. He who does not himself condition circumstances allows the process to be reversed, and becomes a conditioned circumstance. Find your center and live in it. Surrender it to no person, to no thing. In the degree that you do this, will you find yourself growing stronger and stronger in it. And how can one find a center? By realizing his oneness with the infinite power, and by living continually in this realization. But if you do not rule from your own center, if you invest this or that with the power of bringing you annoyance or evil or harm, then take what it brings. But cease your railings against the eternal goodness and beneficence of all things. I swear the earth shall surely be complete, to him or her who shall be complete. The earth remains jagged and broken, only to him who remains jagged and broken. If the windows of your soul are dirty and streaked, covered with foreign matter to them, then the world as you look out of them will be to you dirty and streaked and out of order. Cease your complainings. However, keep your pessimism, your poor unfortunate me, to yourself, lest you betray the fact that your windows are badly in need of something. But know that your friend, who keeps his windows clean, that the eternal sun may illumine all within and make visible all without, know that he lives in a different world from yours. Then go wash your windows, and instead of longing for some other world, you will discover the wonderful beauties of this world. And if you don't find transcendent beauties on every hand here, the chances are that you will never find them anywhere. The palm hangs on the berry bush, when comes the poet's eye, and the whole street is a masquerade when Shakespeare passes by. This same Shakespeare, whose mere passing causes all this commotion, is the one who put into the mouth of one of his creations the words, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." And the great work of his own life is right good evidence that he realized full well the truth of the facts we are considering. And again, he gave us a great truth in keeping with what we are considering when he said, "Our doubts are traitors, and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. There is probably no agent that brings us more undesirable conditions than fear. We should live in fear of nothing, nor will we when we come fully to know ourselves. An old French proverb runs, 'Some of your griefs you have cured, and the sharpest you still have survived. But what torments of pain you endured from evils that never arrived.'"
So Trine points to a couple different scientific studies dealing with the effects of fear on bodily health, and conversely the effect of courage, which again, that's something that I've talked about as well, is that courage is a spiritualized form of fear. Again, I think, like Course in Miracles and things like that, they see it as a binary between fear and love. I do not see that. I guess they see it more of as a spectrum rather than a binary, but again, still, I see that as binary. The spiritualization of fear then is courage, and that's the message of Jesus in Gethsemane, right? Courage has a very positive effect on the body. And when patients tend to believe that they will get better and have the courage to endure the treatments that they have to go through, they tend to heal better. But this highlights the importance of science in New Thought. And I think those two parts, the one I mentioned earlier, mystery, and then the one I literally forgot earlier, science, are two neglected aspects of New Thought that I think need to be expanded upon more. I think those two aspects, more than anything now in our day and age, with the technology we have, with the so-called AI, it's not really AI, it's just really sort of better search engines and things, but better aggregation of data that already exists.
but still, with all these technological advances, with the medical advances that we've made and things, I think now is a time more than ever that New Thought people need to lean into science and looking at mathematics, looking at the advances in physics that have happened lately, looking at advances in neuroscience and how the brain affects the body, I think is important as well. So that's something I intend to do. I'm not as much that's not necessarily my core competency, is the hard science, but certainly biology, evolution, all these things are things that I have always had an interest in, but I'm not expert on that side of it. Now the other thing is mystery too, which I talked a little bit about before. But I think, rather than say, Ed Rabel gives it two examples. Was Jesus born of a virgin? I don't know. Who knows? It's a mystery. The other one, why does bad stuff exist? I don't know. Okay, well, let's not be satisfied with I don't know, right? That's mysticism, is the study of the mystery. So, and it very well may be that the synthesis is the idea of polarity of opposites, the Hermetic concept that everything contains opposites, but they are all one. Non-duality, but opposites exist, but they exist in concert with one another, like the Taoists talk about yin and yang. So maybe that's a way to synthesize, to resolve the contradictions. In the 70s, they talked about synergy, people working together for a common goal, and then all their energy combining. So I think that's sort of the way forward, is this synergetic concept. And that's sort of the basis behind the World Day of Prayer that Unity does, and a lot of different things, is that when you, there's also a group at my church that's starting a study of the book, The Power of Eight, and trying to actually operationalize and use those principles to affect reality, lowercase r reality. And that's the concept, is that by raising your vibration, there was also a group in the 1970s that in protest against the Vietnam War, I think Allen Ginsberg and some of the beatnik type people were part of this. They surrounded the White House, or was it they surrounded the Pentagon, I think, with prayer circles, meditation circles, and tried to literally levitate the Pentagon. It did not levitate, but I like to think at least they maybe had some effect on ending that war in concert with all the other things that were going on in the collective subconscious at the time.
Health walk where pain has trod. As a man thinketh, so he is. Rise then, and think with God. The whole matter may then be summed up in one sentence. God is well, and so are you. You must awaken to the knowledge of your real being. When this awakening comes, you will have, and you will see that you have, the power to determine what conditions are externalized in your body. You must recognize, you must realize yourself as one with the infinite spirit. God's will is then your will. Your will is God's will. And with God, all things are possible. When we are able to do away with all sense of separateness by living continually in the realization of this oneness, not only will our bodily ills and weaknesses vanish, but all limitations along all lines. Then, delight thyself in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Then you will feel like crying all the day long. The lines are fallen unto me in pleasant places. Yea, I have a goodly heritage. Drop out of your mind your belief in good things and good events coming to you in the future. Come now into the real life, and coming, appropriate, and actualize them now. Remember that only the best is good enough for one with a heritage so royal as yours. We buy ashes for bread. We buy diluted wine. Give me the true, whose ample leaves and tendrils curled among the silver hills of heaven draw everlasting dew.
Truth is not, I